Welcome to Reality of Faith and Wisdom. My name is Yuri, and today I want to talk about Pinnacle of Failure. And the reason why I call this Pinnacle of Failure, because myself, I'm going to be transparent today. And it's not that I'm not transparent, but today I'm going to be even more transparent than usually. Today podcast is going to be pretty much unscripted. I have just couple of things from right here, right in front of me to just remind me, and I have two verses from the Bible. But usually I'm prepared, usually I have questions and all these things. But today is unscripted because I just wanted to share what happened a couple of, I would say, weeks, almost a month and a half ago. And today we have an awesome and amazing guest by the name Pastor Yuriy Partin from Shoreline Church. Pastor Yuriy Partin, he's my overseer here locally. He is my pastor that I look up to. He is my dear friend, and many times he has pulled me up from the mud of life. I'm just going to say it the way it is, and you just kind of pick me up and just come on, let me slap you a couple of times and let me put you straight back on the road that God has you.
You're easy to do that, though. You're a great guy, and really honored to. Thanks for letting me be on the podcast with you too.
No, the honor is thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I love that you want to be transparent. Don't you love it when a pastor says, "Can I be honest with you?" And you go, "So all these times you've been preaching, you haven't been honest?"
Well, no, because let's because it's unscripted. We can do whatever we want, right? Yeah. I mean, but when you're preparing, you have something to say. You know, you're gonna pull out and share some stories, and you're gonna talk about everything truthfully, 100%.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about unprepared, when there is no line by line, and this is
scary. Isn't it?
It is, because you're just sharing the heart, and I guess that's the difference. You're sharing really what happened to you. You're sharing really, okay, this is it. Huh?
Saturday Night Live years ago did a skit where it's a morning TV like Good Morning America, and the teleprompter goes out, and they all don't know what to do, and after a while, it's like the weatherman is dead, and join your tribe. So that's it. Yeah, you lose your script and you're like, oh.
Well, that's me too, because I don't know about you, but I like everything being like prepped for me. Yeah. I like everything I'm talking about, the thoughts that I might be even talking about, even some of the sentences, how I'm going to say it and the way I say it, and end and so and well. And
relying on the Holy Spirit's tough. I'd just rather have a script.
No, you got to be prepared and rely on the Holy Spirit.
The horse is prepared for battle, but the battle belongs to the Lord. Come on, somebody.
Amen. Now, Pinnacle of Failure.
That actually sounds really encouraging. I'm glad that I can be on here for that. And speaking of Pinnacle of Failure, meet Pastor Yuriy.
No, because here, okay, all right. Now you're going this way. Let me set it up. I'm trying to set it up. You're not letting me set it up. Let me set it up. Let me set it up in this way. You lived a successful life. I know you had many failures because you shared it with me. Me too. You overcame every one of them. You're maybe still overcoming some, we all have, but you were here's the thing. I've been watching you since I got here, and I've been calling you all the time. And I always love the people that understand failure, that live through it, that overcome, that move on.
Yeah. Because
so many people say they moved on.
Yeah.
But they still live in the past.
Well, yeah, it's, I think that you had a guest on, I think it was episode 13. Let's never forget that. I can't remember who the guest was, but he said the longevity to ministry is a thick skin but a tender heart, which are pretty much opposite of each other, but you got to have both of those.
It was you. And the name of that, it was key to overall success. See, like the first podcast was, hey, I really want to know what you have. Because you have something amazing, something awesome. There's so many people that fail. There's so many people that walk away. So many people that say, well, I've been here for 5 years, I'm out. I'm gone. But you've been faithful in your church. You've been faithful. And now you're in a new season. You got a pastor underneath you. You're successfully transitioning. You are now founding pastor of the church.
Yeah.
But you're continuing. You're investing in me. You're investing in others. That's what I love. Finish strong.
Appreciate it. So set this up. What happened then? So you're watching me.
Okay, all right, because now we would see that's what we do when we don't have any script. We just go rabbit trail.
I'm here to keep you back on track.
All right, so Pinnacle of Failure. Now, what I've realized after talking to Pastor Yuriy, that we don't fail in the beginning from my own life. And we don't fail when we dream. We don't fail when we start something, going after the dream. And we don't fail in the end when we actually reach something, because when we finally got to somewhere and we reach something, we're like, man, if I got this, I can dream even bigger. Mm-hmm. But the problem and where we truly fail is right before the breakthrough. That's and right. you said this to me, right before the breakthrough or right before you cross the finish line.
Yeah, yeah.
And mainly the common denominator of failure is that. Every time I'm like, I'm drowning, I'm done, and I know here's the boat, but I can't even see anymore.
Yeah.
It's always before the breakthrough.
Do you know where most people drop out of a marathon is after mile 22? You got 4 miles to go. You just ran 22 miles and you quit. So yeah, it's always near the end. And the reason I told you this story, I said I was running a 10K, mm-hmm. which, because this is a video podcast, right? You can tell that was obviously years and years ago.
Hey, it's both. It's audio podcast, it's video podcast, it's all kinds.
All right, so for those of you on the audio podcast, I'm really fat.
No, you're not.
So I was running a 10K in Orlando, and there was probably 6,000 people at this race. And it was in downtown, maybe Lake Mary. It was like downtown where it was, small cobblestone streets and stuff. And I'm probably at mile 5.5, and the last half a mile goes down and cuts up a block and comes back, and the finish line's over here. And I can hear the crowd over at the finish line just on the other block. I got to still go down, and I wanted to quit so bad. And I asked one of those questions that you don't expect an answer to, but maybe because your heart rate's at 95%, because you're running, you do hear God because you really can't. But I asked this question. I said, why do I always want to quit so close to the finish line? And I distinctly heard the Lord say, because that's when it hurts the most. Mm-hmm. And then he took me to a picture of Jesus and said, where was Jesus tempted to quit? At the very end. He said, Father, if there's any other way to let this cup pass before me, nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. In other words, he's like, is there any other way to do this? I mean, he was in the garden. He's about to go through everything. He's at the finish line of his ministry, and he was wanting to quit, but he didn't give in. He says, that's where it hurts the most. And so, like I told you, many people stop right before breakthrough because that's when the pain is the highest. That's when it's hurting the most. And yet you're right there at the finish line.
So there was a time in my life that I wanted to quit, and I called you. Yeah. I called you, and let me tell you, let me share you that moment. So I'm a pastor. We opened a church in 2017, and so we celebrated 5 years now, officially, unofficially 6 years. And right in the 5th year, when we finally got our building, and going through all the renovations and going through all these things, and finally, like, man, we're looking at, it's not the building that we wanted. It's not the final product. It's not the final, finished place or the final place. But it's ours now. We got my own office, our own sanctuary, all these things. And man, the division, the complaining, just so many things that happen within the church, and everybody's all over the place, and everybody wants to do their own things. And we finally got to, hey, we wanted this building, and it's like building is like a false hope. One of the overseers, I think, Pastor Derek said, building is a false hope. It's like you get to something and there's nothing. And in 5 years, I never thought about quitting. Never did. I wanted to, but I never deeply said, you know what, I'm really contemplating this. I just want to be out.
Yeah.
Just want to do my own thing. So in the middle of that, I called Pastor Eric. And Pastor Eric said, hold on a second. Let me tell you the story of Nehemiah. Let me tell you the story of my own upbringing and where I've been.
Yeah.
And when he told me this, my world just turned upside down. So share this. I want you to share the story of Nehemiah. I want you to share even some of the things that you've said. Because you've been successful, you persevered, you got to, you're at the new beginning now.
Yeah.
But you got to this place, and I thank you for being a leader for me that I can follow.
Well, I remember that conversation because I was in the parking lot of my church in my Jeep. I just left a staff meeting where I kind of discussed this because so we've been in a building for about 6 years now. I think that we are celebrating 18 years as a church coming up in February. And we'd met portable for 12 years. And then a nightclub in our area closed down, big nightclub, been around for 40 years. I mean, I'd seen bands there myself when I was younger. My wife had worked as a cocktail waitress there. So that opened up, and we were it closed down. We made the call, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, after 12 years of being portable, on an Easter Sunday, we announced to the church that we were under contract to buy the Nighttown, the nightclub in Destin.
You're changing history from a nightclub to church.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so, we had people crying and celebrate. It was a big deal, right? So for the next year, we had to do our due diligence. We had to get zoning. Then once we closed on it, we had to do all the remodel. And I had pastors like Rick Bizet or Randy Bizet, I can't remember which one told me, said that when you start a building fund, people will leave your church. And I thought, I didn't believe him because I'm a church planner. We don't believe things like that. No. If we believed things, what people told us, we would never plant a church, right? We wouldn't do it because we think all of us are the next Stephen Furtick, we're the next Michael Jordan. So I didn't believe it. But the next year we called the year of offense. I had my own family, but some blood relatives left because they got offended about stuff. And some of the stuff that people left because they were offended about, I'm like, seriously? That's what you're offended about? Because I can be so much more offensive than that. I could do so much worse than that. And then when we finally closed, the building was done. We got our certificate of occupancy 2 weeks before Easter. We had our first service. And I'm not saying that a building, because Derek said it's not a, what did he say?
False hope.
It's a false hope. I'm not saying that, the building is your promised land, but things did change when we got a building. Things do change when you go from portable to permanent. Mm-hmm. For 12 years being portable, people want to see that you're a person of vision and that you can carry out that vision. Because someone who has vision but doesn't carry out is really just a dreamer, right?
12 years. But 12 years you persevere in portable locations.
Yeah. So people want to see. So there's something about that. But it was almost like everything just kind of disappeared. All the problems disappeared. All those things because of the excitement of being a building. Plus it was Nighttown. So Nighttown had a story. Everyone who grew up here went to Nighttown. They all have stories. Oh, hey, I got drunk up there. Oh, I snorted cocaine. There's where I threw up, all that.
And now they're in church.
And now it's a church building. And so all of those things just kind of disappeared. And I'm not saying that that's what happened, but that year of offense was a big deal for us. It was very difficult, and I thought about quitting. In fact, I had a couple that had given big time to the church and then left for no reason. I finally found them, and we had a meeting, and I actually got sick. I started finding myself getting physically sick during this year of what we called the year of offense, where my body started getting sick, and I had to do I don't want to go into it, but because we don't have time, but there was just a time of spiritual warfare and all of this stuff. And I think you think about Moses when he was leading the people into the promised land, and he was still in the wilderness, and they were at the pool. I wasn't even going to talk about this, so I might not have all the names all right, but the pool of Meribah, where it's bitter
water.
Yeah. And they didn't know that just right down the way was the pool, the one of like the 29 palms or something with all the springs. And how he led there was going to determine how he get to these other, the leader he was going to be at this other thing. So a lot of times here's what I'm saying. I wasn't going to talk about that, so probably wasn't effective. The way we lead in that transition will determine the type of leader we are when we get there. You see what I'm saying? Come on. So I'm used to that kind of thing. So I think in that conversation, is this where I bring up Nehemiah?
Well, you can. Yeah, you can. I was gonna actually share a little bit more about Nehemiah, but
this is unscripted, remember?
Yeah, totally unscripted. And that's fine. And that's okay. I think people like this because as a matter of fact, let me close this and I'll open it up when I wanted to read those two verses. I really truly wanted to quit. And it was truly year of offense in our, people would come up and say, well, there's clouds in our church. Well, there's the Holy Spirit left, and then this and that, and, you used to preach, you were full of Holy Spirit. Now I don't feel the whole Holy Spirit. And it was a year of offense. And I never thought about it. And then you said, hey, I want you to read into the story of Nehemiah. Yeah. And let me start with Nehemiah, because Nehemiah was working as a cupbearer in the king who was Persian.
Right. King Artaxerxes.
Yep. And Nehemiah was actually tasting everything before he would give it to the king. So if it's poison, that's not a good job. He didn't have a good job. Because you think, cupbearer, I'm right by the king. No, you're actually tasting everything.
But one of the lines in there was he'd also become friends to the king.
Yes.
He wasn't just a servant, but he was a friend.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he was happy. He was genuinely happy all the time. I'm reading it because the one time that he appears before the king.
Yeah.
And he said, and so And the story goes, the brother from Israel came and said, hey, our gates burned down and our walls are falling apart. And basically, hey, our town is going to be destroyed completely.
Yeah.
And so tell the story. I love how you say.
Well, see, because what had happened was first Jerusalem was conquered by Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar brought all these people back. Then Babylon's conquered by the Persians. And so now Susa is the capital. Artaxerxes is the king, and this is like some 70 years later, and he's like, hey, why do we have all these Jews around here? And they're like, oh, well, remember when we conquered Babylon? They had a bunch of Jews that they had conquered too. He was like, oh, well, if the Jews want to go home, let them go home. So that's what the remnant was. Remnant was of a group of Jews that had permission to go back to Jerusalem. But the people surrounding Jerusalem, they call them warlords, people like Sanballat and Tobias and all those guys. They didn't want Jerusalem to be rebuilt because that was their meal ticket now. These guys are warlords and they're, faithful to...
They were their slaves in the way.
Yep. So when these guys come back and he's like, hey, what's it like? Now the remnant are going back. What's going on? And they're like, it's still a disgrace. I mean, the walls are burned. Still the walls are crumbled down. The gates are burned down. There's no protection against these guys. And so that, of course, broke Nehemiah's heart. And then if you've read the story, and if you haven't, I encourage you to do it. He starts to pray and fast. And then he goes before, one time he's in there serving King Artaxerxes, and he's like, the king says, so why so blue, Panda Bear? And he's like, how can I be excited when the city of my ancestors lies in ruins? And he said, well, what do you want to do? He says, how about you give me some time off? He goes, well, better than that. I'll make you the governor of Jerusalem. You go back. You can have, carte blanche with Home Depot. Go down there, just put it on the card. Take some soldiers with you and go over there and start rebuilding do what you want to do.
But God gives Nehemiah the dream.
Yeah, the vision.
Dream to go back and rebuild the wall. So he gives him provision. He gives him approval in the way. He gives him, hey, this is what God spoke to me. And King is saying, all right, I'm behind you. So he's backing the voice of God sort of in Nehemiah's life.
Yeah.
And everything is so exciting. You can apply that in marriage. You can apply that in the church. You can apply that in the business.
Yeah.
You got a dream. You got provisions. You raise some money. You're starting. You're like, wow.
That's like what you just said. You don't quit during that time.
No.
That's when you show up to Destin and you go, hey, what's your name? I'm Yuri. What are you doing? Why'd you move to Destin? I'm here planting a church. We've been looking for a church.
Yes.
Oh, you need some supplies? We can. Yeah. I can do that. And you're like, whoa, this is God. Everything's happening.
That's like I called you and you're like, yeah, we're closing one of the campuses. We're moving to a not night town. Hey, just go get, and like, exactly. Go get everything you want.
All that happens. But where did he get the resistance? He got resistance later on, because we know that if you read the story, he finished the walls in 52 days, but it wasn't without resistance. There was a lot of resistance. And the reason why this was fresh on my mind when you called me was because I had just finished talking to my staff about this. And the reason I just talked to my staff about this was, okay, so you said, let me sidetrack here. We're going to come back to Nehemiah. Mm-hmm. You said, I'm in a new season, right? Mm-hmm. I'm ministering to pastors, or I'm traveling or whatever. So we actually have a pastor, Pastor Graham, who's going to take over the church. And it's probably going to be another 3 years, and he will be the lead pastor. Right now, he's the pastor in training, okay? He's the pastor, he's getting ready for it. And so I'll still be the senior pastor. We've decided instead of founding pastor, I'm going to be the senior pastor because I'm going to stay on staff. But basically, he'll become the more upfront person, and I'm going to be the guy. So in my mind, here's what was happening, what was going to look like. This was going to look like I do less and less work. He does more and more work. And I even told my staff at one point last year, it's kind of like your grandfather. You don't ask your grandfather to help you move apartments, right? You get your cousin to do that. I'm not going to do the heavy lifting. So I figured that I was just going to kind of coast the rest of my ministry career, if you call it. And because you know what, I'd already done 2 building funds. Yeah, I've already raised funds twice, capital campaigns, and I hate capital campaigns because I am not a finance guy. I'm a pastor, and I don't like that. So I figured I was going to coast, and so I told you when I went camping by myself, right? What happened? So I went camping by myself for 6 nights, and I'd had a really rough 3 years. We were homeless for a while, lived in a camper in the parking lot of the church. I actually felt like I was the church security guard. I'd lost all the equity in my home that I'd built for over a lifetime. And so I was pretty upset with God. And then a year later, here I am living in the parking lot of a church. And a year later, I have a nice, beautiful house on the water because of some circumstances that I just didn't believe God. People would say, well, Eric, God just probably has something better for you. This is when I'm living in the parking lot, and I'm like, I used to live on the water, right? So I just didn't believe God. So now a year later, my father died. We didn't think he had any, I didn't really have a relationship with him. I didn't think he had any money, and I got left a whole lot of money, and we were actually supposed to buy a house to take care of him, and we did. And then he died 3 days before he moved in. So now we're in this beautiful house on the water. And here I am a year. So now I'm out camping by myself in the wilderness in Wyoming, and I was just blown away by the goodness of God, the grace of God. I did not deserve to be in this home. I didn't deserve to be camping out in the beautiful wilderness, looking up at these gorgeous stars, talking to the Lord. And I just had a moment where I felt like Peter on the beach with Jesus after he rose from the dead. Just kind of, do you love me? Yes, I do. Then feed my sheep. And I just kind of came out of that with renewed vision. And so when I came back, I felt a burden. I felt like Nehemiah. I had a burden that I wasn't supposed to coast, that I needed to prepare this next generation of leaders to be successful. Because I read a statistic that said, because our church is 17 years old, it's going to be 18 years old, 23% of churches survive a next generation handoff. Okay, in other words, only 23%. So say a generation of a pastor's life is 20 to 25 years, senior pastoring a church. So when you pass that off, add another 20 to 25 years for the next generation, will a church come out of that successful? Mm-hmm. And then it cuts in half for the third generation and down to 4% for the fourth generation. So if you think about this, you don't see many 80 to 100-year-old churches because they just don't survive that handoff. And there's a whole nother message. I'd love to talk to you about that. I've done some research and thought about this and think there's some solutions to that. But anyway, so I felt like we needed to prepare this next generation. So
you've been doing that with me. So,
but I needed to repair. But here's my thinking was stinking. Pull out some old Pentecostal thinking. I was thinking that I'm just going to coast in. I'm not going to have any more challenges. Then the last 3 years, I lose my house. I mean, these are the things that you believe God and trust God in the beginning. I'm coasting now. I'm going to just coast on in, and then one day I'll be in heaven. No. Now I'm doing all those faith challenges, and Lord, I'm believing you. And I just didn't understand why and all of that. But so I came back with a renewed, I've got to prepare this next generation of my church. And so we decided that we were going to do a building capital campaign. That was one of the things I did not want to do.
A third one
to pay off the building. And the reason was I looked at the story where David, and I know we're jumping around to different stories, but David is about to pass off. He's not allowed to build the temple. So he gathers everybody and he says, my son Solomon is called to be the next king, but he's inexperienced and the task before him is daunting. So I am going to do everything within my resources to resource him, everything into my, whatever I can do. I'm lack of words here, but to resource him so that he can be successful at this. And I thought, oh my God, that is us. Because sometimes I get frustrated with this next generation of staff people. I don't want to call them snowflakes, but sometimes they feel entitled or, Pastor Eric, you can't say that, things like that. And the thing I say is like, man, I'm just so glad that I don't have a kid in school. I'm just so glad that I'm towards the end of my ministry.
We all go through stuff.
But here's the thing is I stood before my church and I said, there's some people here, you're in my generation and you're successful and you've built all this wealth. And you are saying the same thing because I hear you say, I'm just so glad I don't have kids in school right now. So glad that I don't have to deal with that. I'm so glad that I'm retired and I have to deal with that kind of stuff. I'm so glad that, whatever it is, whether it's politics or whatever. I said, but the task before them is daunting. You know it because you're avoiding it. The task before them is daunting. When I was in youth ministry, we dealt with cutting and eating disorders. Now we're dealing with junior high girls who don't know what gender they are. And you know what I do? Boy, I'm so glad I'm not in youth ministry right now. But there's somebody in youth ministry and it's daunting and they're inexperienced. So we need to do everything we can to prepare them. So I pitched it out there. We're in a building campaign right now. And it is all about so that we can pay off this building so that our next generation of leaders don't have that debt sitting over them.
What is your website? Is shoreline.com?
Shorelinechurch.net.
Shorelinechurch.net.
Yeah,
so if somebody wants to give towards the campaign, shorelinechurch.net.
So then on the last Sunday of August, I announced something else. We had a children's pastor / youth pastor, full-time, phenomenal young lady, doing really well. And she resigned because she was getting married. And we were having to replace her. We were trying to think of what we should do. And meanwhile, I went and visited the children's ministry, and it was a wreck. The people in there were awesome. I believe they're called. In fact, the couple that's running the kids' church reminds me of myself and Darlene, my wife, when we were younger. And they just needed to be trained. We took them out to Willie George and stuff. But so I announced to my church, not only were we doing a building campaign, but that I'm no longer going to speak for the rest of the year, that I'm going to move into kids ministry. I'm going to become the children's pastor.
Pastors, listen up. That's a humility that you don't see ever. You don't see humility like this.
And I'm so proud of it. No, I don't. But it all happened when I was camping. I'm out there camping. I just I had a great time with the Lord, and I just heard him give me all of this, And so I said, I'm no longer going to speak on Sunday, because Graham is a great communicator. He's a phenomenal communicator. So I'm going to move into children's ministry, and why would I not? Because the task before them is daunting, and they just need to be equipped. They need to be trained. They need to be encouraged. They need to be all of those things, because the task before them is daunting. So I'm now the senior pastor of the church, who's also the children's minister, which is really cool, because I started out in kids ministry, and I kind of had the picture of Nehemiah going back home to his roots. Here I am going back to my roots, but it's cool because I don't make a kids pastor's salary. I'm still making a senior pastor's salary. So that's awesome as well. So when you called, I had just talked to my staff about Nehemiah. And the reason why I talked about him is because when Nehemiah starts to cast the vision, the resistance to the vision started coming, especially when you start to pull it off, when things start to happen. And if you know the story of Nehemiah, there was 4 things that happened. Sanballat, who was the warlord that was kind of controlling the area, sees himself losing control. And the first thing, and this is what I told my staff, because after I preached that on last Sunday in August, I was actually leaving for 21 days, 3 weeks vacation. Then we were meeting the children's ministry in Tulsa, and then I'll come back, I'll be in children's ministry. And when the leader leaves, that's when everyone's really susceptible. So I said, here's what's going to happen, staff. If we look at the story of Nehemiah, the first thing that Sanballat and Gershom and Tobias they came with criticism. Oh, you think you're going to build this wall? You guys don't. I think one of them even said, oh, if a fox gets on that wall, it'll fall down. I was like, what are you, like Anchorman? Where'd you get your suit? From the toilet store? Remember that movie? Yeah. Yeah. I said, so the first thing that's going to happen is that there's going to be criticism, and especially going to happen when I'm gone, that people are going to begin to criticize. Why are we doing this? I don't understand. There's going to be criticism. And I said, you need to be aware of this, because here's what happens the criticism rarely comes to the top. It has to filter its way. And so we have to equip our younger leaders to this is what's going to happen. Here's what your response needs to be. So the first thing was criticism. The second thing they came with, but not only was there criticism, and I'm trying to remember because I didn't remember I was even having a podcast, but it was the infiltration. Mm-hmm. They tried to infiltrate them and bring discord. He says, when the criticism didn't work, let's sow discord and sow disunity. So they tried to infiltrate Nehemiah's ranks and bring discord.
I wrote these things down because there was in the regular language, there was a whole lot of lying going on. There's a whole lot of violence going on.
Violence was actually the next one.
Yeah. Mockery going on, complaining going on. Like it's not just one or two things. It was a cloud of things that just kind of descended on Nehemiah.
So first he had criticism from Tobias and Sanballat and Gershom. Then they said, okay, let's infiltrate. Let's bring some Jewish people. Hey, I want to help. I want to be a part. And they sowed discord. So you need to recognize the discord. The third thing was violence. Then they said, okay, and that's when Nehemiah goes, all right, everybody's going to strap a sword on them. Someone's going to stand guard. You're going to have a trowel in one hand, a sword in the other. If you hear the trumpet blow, that means there's trouble going over here. So leave your post and go down and fight. And so there was violence. And I told my staff, there's going to be a spiritual warfare here going on. And so in this time period, we need to be in prayer and don't be unaware of the schemes of the enemy, and that he's going to resort to violence. And then the last thing they tried to do was they tried to get Nehemiah off the wall and say, hey, there's rumors that you're trying to establish yourself as king, in hopes that he would either they'd come off the wall and they would meet him, because they wanted to meet him out on the plains of oh no, And he says, I'm not going out there. I'm not going to meet you because it's not true. I know what you're trying to do. You're just trying to spread rumors about me, and then hoping that I'll run hightail back and to the king and go, I promise you, I'm not trying to be the king of Jerusalem. He says, I'm not going to do it. He said, and the great term he used was that the work I have is too important. I'm not coming off the wall. And that kind of became our battle cry. But what I did was I talked to my staff and I said, here's what's going to happen in this period, because we have till the end of the year that we're raising money to pay off the building. These are the things that are going to come, and you need to recognize them, especially when I'm on vacation, I'm gone. You need to recognize them. So I just finished this. When I walk into the parking lot, I get a phone call from you, and it's almost the exact same thing. Discouraged because of the year of offense, people criticizing, people causing problems, dissension, disunity, all because you're buying a building. Because the enemy doesn't want you to accomplish that.
It's everything. The people think that the building is going to be the answer, and the building is not. And people think it's going to be this, and it's the final product is not the way they imagined it, or and it's like one thing builds upon another. It's like a broken phone.
Yeah.
By the time it gets to there, I'm flying from vacation. I was gone with my family, first time in 5 years. Literally, I went on vacation with my wife, and sometimes I took my kids.
But sometimes we go, I got to take my kids on vacation.
No, but this time I realized, man, I'm being a bad dad. I'm focusing on the church, and first year, okay, 2 years, and it's 5 years. And this time I'm finally getting all of my kids, and we're just out for 2 weeks, and I'm flying home. And there's like 100 phone calls. I mean, I'm over exaggerating. It's not 100, but I had like
your phone's going. Yeah.
I mean, there's 50 some messages and this and that. Hey, everything is crumbling. Everything's falling apart. Everybody's complaining. Everybody don't like this. They don't like the vision of this. They don't like it. And it was just like, I was like, Lord, I never signed up for this. I don't want this. I'm done with this. As a matter of fact, I mean, unless I live for what? What do we live for? To see a life change. Yeah. That's what we live for. That's what we thrive on. And if we're doing everything that we can, and in the end, people just see the final result, not what they wanted to see. And just things start to build upon another.
Yeah. Life, it runs in seasons. It's secular. You're in a season right now. We're in a season right now. And so I get there's truth to that. Building isn't a cure-all, or it's not what'd you use? What was the term again?
False hope.
It could be false hope. But the truth is there is a finish line that accompanies that building. And there's a new season that accompanies when you move into that building. And it'll start out exciting. And then not one day, but eventually you'll get to where it becomes you're fighting again, and you've got to go through it might become routine. But the truth is, when you first get into a building, it's exciting because it's a new season and you accomplished something and you finished. And that's why it's so important the way I really believe that God uses those period. Because that year, I would never wish on my worst enemy what I went through that year. I mean, but what God did in me and the prayers that I prayed, if I hadn't had that, I would have never had that happen to me. He did something in me that would not have happened at any other time unless I was going through that period. And there was prayers that I prayed that I would have never thought to pray for if I hadn't been going through that period. And I really, truly believe that the way we lead in that will determine how we lead when we get there. That was the deal with the pool of Meribah, or the bitter pool, and then the pool with the springs and the palm trees, basically an oasis. The way we lead will determine how we lead there. So we have to go through those as a leader. So what you went through, you have to go through. But we also have to keep our eye on the finish line, on the prize. I love Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. And I love that statement because he's not a college professor that says, this is how you do business, has never done business before. Fred Smith, who started FedEx, got a D on his final paper for the model of FedEx. And this professor in business, I think it was Yale or Harvard Business School, said, you'd get a better grade if it was something that could actually be done, and now look at Federal Express, right? It's not, Jesus isn't like a professor that tells you that he's the author and the perfecter of our faith. He's walked it out. Everything that you're going through, he's gone through and more. The Hebrews says you've not yet shed your blood, resisting sin. But author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross. He had to look to the finish line. What was the joy before him? What was the finish line? Was the reconciliation of man with his Father, humankind with God. And that's the same thing we have. We have to go through that period in order to get to that finish line. Doesn't mean we're done. It just means that certain finish line. And I think the way we lead in it is the way we're going to lead when we get through it. Yeah.
As a matter of fact, when you spoke to me, I went about this. I went home and I told my wife. Then I told my staff. The next day, and I said this, that we're going to be, in some time in our life, we're going to be keeping, spear in one hand and the hammer in another. But the main thing, what your word did in me, I never said this to you. I came home and I started to analyze my life. Because, as far as we're dreamers. We are dreamers. We're visionaries. And I started to analyze my life. And I'm like, I have healthy kids.
Yeah.
I have healthy life. I have healthy finances.
Right. I promised myself I wasn't going to cry.
No. And I look at my wife and I'm like, man, I love you to death. I have you by my side.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at, and I have people that loves me in church. And I have people, there's people that love me and don't love me. It doesn't matter. You know what I'm saying? Some people, people don't. And I started to analyze my life. And God has said this to me. He did it once before. And when I was in Oklahoma, I moved to Oklahoma with $400 in my pocket. That's all I had. $400 in my pocket. And 7 years later, I'm sitting down, I'm complaining, I'm whining to God. I'm like, my life is horrible.
I've been there.
And God is like, okay, if you would be butt naked right now, like you have nothing, butt naked, how much money would you have in your bank account? And I'm like, when you came here to Florida, I'm like, well, if I sell my van, I had an Astro van, some tools, maybe 20,000, maybe that's maximum. And he said, and I had 5 homes by then. I've invested in 5 homes and in this and this and this. And I'm sitting there and God said, didn't I repay you 100 times?
Yeah.
Even more. I'm weeping on the curb. I'm like, Lord, forgive me. I'm an idiot. I'm stupid. I have nothing to complain about, Nothing. And same thing happened after your conversation. I looked at my life and I'm like, man, I have good friends. I have pastors that I look up to. I have pastors that pick up the phone. Man, I don't know, out of every pastor, you pick up the phone right away. Like, I love that. I want to be like you too. I'm like, because this busyness sometimes kills me.
Yeah.
And simple words of just like, man, stop looking at all these things. Keep the sword in one hand and keep the hammer in another and just enjoy life.
That's right. I feel like we've never been, I'm 60 years old, so obviously I've learned some things from two capital campaigns. But I think we've never been as prepared for that capital campaign as we are now. And we've gotten the criticism. Now what happens is, usually what happens in a church is it goes to the younger staff. It doesn't reach you. But we have to equip our younger staff how to deal with it, because they'll come to you and go, this is what'd you say? Well, I didn't know what to say. So I've equipped my staff so we've handled it. But I've had a text that's come and said, oh, you guys are talking about giving to the building and Hurricane Ian just destroyed Southwest Florida and all you want is money. Or that we're in a time of inflation. So the criticism gets to us and it's going to be there, but we've expected it. And there's something inside you when you know that it's going to come. You're prepared for it. It doesn't catch you off guard. It doesn't take your knees out from under you. If I want to use a sports term, when I know this guy's going to come at me a certain way to block me, and I can, then it doesn't affect me as much. So yeah, it's been a good journey, and I feel really healthy right now as far as us going into this time, and I'm having a blast in kids' church.
And that's the main thing I'm learning from you. That's the main thing is to enjoy life. I have never seen you. I know you've been through even when you were living on the church parking lot.
Yeah,
and you were down. There was still joy in you. There was still peace in you. There was like when I saw you and you're like, yeah, I'm here, man. We lost our home, and you told me the whole story maybe for another podcast. But man, I just this pureness inside.
And now, well, we got a house. We ended up getting a house, but it was like, and I didn't want to seem ungrateful to God, But at the same time, I'm like, this is about not much bigger than our first house when we got married 37 years ago and we bought our first home. I'm almost back to that same point where I'm starting over again. So I was glad to be in a home, but I was discouraged. And then my father, who I hadn't had a real relationship with, his wife died, and we end up having to take care of him because there's nobody else. So he sells his house. And here I am, so now we're living in this house that's on the water. But if I was a word of faith person, word of faith, like confess it and believe it, I shouldn't be living there because I did not confess it into existence. Right. And on the last night of camping, I told you this, I think I might have told you this, I'd camped 6 nights by myself. And I just on the third night I had that encounter I just felt like God around the fire, Peter, hey, do you love me? Don't worry about that. We're going forward and we're going to shake some things. We're going to make some things happen. You're being used. You still have passion, because I was going to coast, And on the last night of camping, I just spent 6 days camping by myself and just talking to the Lord. And the last night I heard voices. I was remote, super remote. I've got a gun strapped to me because I'm out in the wilderness, and I heard a voice. And so I started walking around the camp. I didn't see anything. So then I actually kind of hid myself in the trees in the darkness to see if someone showed up. Nothing happened. I went back and I started sitting around the fire talking to the Lord again. And then I realized it was his voice I was hearing, but it was so clear. It wasn't out loud. If you'd have been there, you wouldn't have heard it. But it was so, I'd been 6 days camping by myself. It was so clear in my head that it sounded like it was outside. And that's when I was just like, yeah.
Pastors, listen up. You might have a friend pastor who's going through similar stuff, because Nehemiah's story can be applied in marriage, truly, because we're going to marriage with provision, with love, with this and that, and then somewhere right before another season, that's when we wanted to. I actually talked to somebody in our church, and they're like, "Hey, I think we're going to get married. What's going to happen? What's going to happen to me?" You know, I'm like, we're going to get divorced, not married. I'm like, no. That's the end. That's the end. Let's, and you can apply that in business.
Yeah.
Because first business is thriving, this and that. And this before the next season, that's where the dead devil wants to kill you.
Yeah. And it only took him 52 days. Yeah. I've been to Jerusalem. You've been there?
Yeah.
I've run around the city. Uh-huh. It's a 5K, 3 miles to run around those walls. It took them 52 days to rebuild those walls. It took Walton County 4 years to widen the Highway 98. They built it in 52 years. 52. When there's vision and there's unity, there's nothing that you can't accomplish. But there will be resistance, and you need to know that.
So let me finish with this. And you might want to end something on top of that. What happened to me is I heard your voice, and it was from God. I came home, I analyzed my life, and I realized I have to enjoy the journey and not to get to the outcome, just the outcome, because or the end result, because we're so wired is when I get to that, then I'll be happier. And I'm like, no. My life is amazing. Kind of a tabernacle prayer. I'm coming with praise in your courts. Yeah. My life is amazing. I know what you've done for me. Help me to enjoy life. And here's the thing, pastors, when you listen to, you have to have pastors like I have, pastor friends who can speak to you, who can rebuke you, who can tell you, because accountability is everything.
And you're a good person. I mean, how do I put this? I deal with younger pastors, but you are open to that. You are very receptive to instruction and correction and things like that. It's not that I have to correct you. I mean, dude, you have such a calling in your life, and you're making an impact more than you know. And I'm so proud of you and your family. You're doing a great job, and you are.
Thank you for being my pastor.
You are where you're supposed to be at such a time as this. If I could use another Old Testament phrase of someone who is also awesome, Esther.
Amen. Yeah. Amen. Thank you. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine on you, be gracious to you, turn his face towards you. And if you want to know more about Shoreline Church, and Pastor Eric is shorelinechurch.net. Yes?
Yes. And if you want to know more about Impulse,
impulsechurch.com.
Thanks for having me on the show. You call it a show?
You can call it whatever you want.
A podcast.
A podcast, a show.
Yeah.
Until next time.
Bye.